Great. Thank you so much, each one of you, for joining us today. I welcome you all. I welcome you all who's joining us on YouTube, who's joining us on Facebook, who's joining us from all around the world. Thank you so much, each one of you, for joining us today. I welcome you all. A minute, please. Okay, great. I'm sorry, there was some technical error. I can see Faisal has also joined in. I'm just quickly going to make him a co-host. Okay, he is co-host. Amazing. Hi, Faisal. How are you doing?
Thank you so much. Great work, dear. Go ahead. Yeah.
Great. So I was introducing the amazing and dynamic speaker for today. His name is Ethan Seow, and Ethan is joining us all the way from Singapore. Thank you so much, Ethan, for joining us. It's midnight there, and yet he is here with us. Thank you so much for joining in. Today, Ethan is going to be talking about how to be recognized at work without playing office politics. It's such an interesting subject. Don't you all want to master the office tactics and everything about office? He is exactly going to be talking about it. Ethan is a TEDx speaker, he's an author, he's a culture designer, he's a coach, he's a musician, and he's an educator. And he is also an ex-medical student. When I was interacting with Ethan, I already could learn a lot of things which he was talking about. Ethan has been an inspiration to so many, and his TEDx talk got me hooked onto it totally. And he is a real inspiration. Over to you, Ethan, for taking us through the session.
Hi, everybody. Okay, so yes, it is really late over here, and I'm very glad to be here, here with everybody here today. If I can just have a general sense of how you guys are feeling, just type into the chat. Okay, throughout this session, feel free to raise your hands. Let me know if you have any questions. Just type it into the chat box, because I like to keep things casual and interactive. And I am always happy to just get people to just understand a little bit more about what I talk about. All right. So I started this project a while back called The Office Matters, and the goal of it was to solve office politics, right? So of course, in order to do this, we had to have a goal in mind, right? How do you get people to get recognized without having to play the office politics itself? And that's what I'm going to talk about today. So with that, just so you know, I'm also, yes, I'm an author, a TEDx speaker. And what happens is that I actually studied psychiatry in medical school. So just for you guys to know, like, why I'm so interested in this topic and why I'm so far into this is because my biggest love has always been dealing with managing and helping people be better, right? And one of the key parts about this is I started recognizing how the office affects a lot of people's emotions. And if you recognize that that's a problem for you, I'm glad you're here today, right? Let's talk a little bit more about why is it so hard to be working with officers and dealing with the issues at the workplace. And that's really why it's so important. Just as another note, I also work as a musician. So as you can tell from my photos, I love being a musician. I actually take quite a bit of, oh, I just realized my sharing the screen didn't happen. I'm so sorry.
It's okay, Ethan.
As you can tell from my photos, right? So just last year, I was just at Nepal to do Jazz Mandu. I look forward to going to other places. I work with a Cuban band. I also work in jazz groups. I've done a lot of different types of music. Traveled to Poland. I've also worked in a lot of different areas. Thank you, Tulika, and thanks for forgiving me. Thanks for being kind. So, I mean, I just go back to this, right? My path has always not been the most obvious, right? I haven't been the kind of person who follows the rules too much. And that always put me under fire when it comes to the workplace. I'm pretty sure a lot of people would understand that, especially if you're a bubbly, outspoken person, chances are people will attack you, right? So there's a lot of different things about the workplace that, affects a lot of us, doesn't allow us to be ourselves. And This is why I wanted to go a bit further into exploring this with people and getting them to understand what is needed to get the recognition you need. So here's what you'll learn today, right? So we need to define office politics in the first place. Right now, how many of you actually know the proper dictionary definition of office politics? I guess that's not a lot of people. Not really. I can check on Google. Yes. There's a lot of different definitions. And I just want to go through that with you guys so you can understand. Why is it so important to understand the definition and understand what office politics is about? And then the other part about it is then what is recognition? Right. So as with everything, right, I recognize that without the clarity of what these are, without the clarity of the goals that you're trying to reach, it's very hard to achieve the next point. All right. So one of the things I really enjoyed is Empowerment Talks has very clear goals it's trying to get across to people, right? You're trying to address, well, firstly, empower people during these really tough times. Secondly, building the, yes, absolutely. Being recognized due to your connections is a very interesting thing about office politics, and I will share a little bit more about that. I think it's very important that we actually, like Empowerment Talks, very clear goals, very clear desires of what you're trying to achieve, right? I think repeating that is a very powerful point. Being very clear about it and being very clear about your goals makes it very possible for people to then benefit from this interaction. And this is really why we're trying to move this forward. And then we talk about the parts of how do you actually get recognition responsibly. That means don't play office politics. And so as Khalid put there, right, being recognized due to your connections rather than work achievements, which is really, really important that we need to talk about. So what are the traditional definitions of office politics? So when we talk about it, a lot of it's very much related to the activities, attitudes, and the behaviors that are used to keep power or an advantage within a business or company. So this is a dictionary definition, right? So how many of you are trained in understanding what power and advantage actually means? Yes, attitude check is definitely a must, right? So it's very interesting, right? What gets you to gain power or advantage in a company? But what does that actually mean? And that's what we're trying to explore today as well. So, and then I went into sociology and started reading the books and different things to try to find the definition. And yes, power leads to advantage. The information and sometimes the emotion-driven processes that allows the limited resources that the company has. I mean, no matter how much resources you have, you still have limited resources. And the working out of goals, decisions, and actions in an environment of people with competing interests and personality. So we talk about this as there are limited resources, there are people trying to compete for the same thing. And how do you actually reallocate the resources? That's office politics. That's one of the definitions, right? Then we talk about the next level where some people actually, bosses think they have power due to position and they take advantage of that. And that's exactly what I'm going to talk about later. That's a very interesting topic to talk about, right? So that's why we came up with a language for it. And I'll explain a bit more. So learning how to navigate through a company and influence others to accept your ideas so that you gain traction to the highest levels of the organization. And this is, yes, power misuse. That's a very useful way of looking at it too. There are a lot of different ways you can look at this, but if you notice, it goes back to power, advantage. It goes back to all of this. You know what's the funniest part we've discovered along the way? So this is why we had to come up with our own definition, right? What is the funniest things we realized about this? If you actually research political science, if you research a lot of different things, you start realizing that there's no mechanism and description of the processes of office politics. There's no real proper language around this. There's no universal measure. So in sociology, we measure by groups of people. In psychology, we measure by individuals. In medicine, we measure by disease, right? So at each thing that we do, we measure different things. And if you look at office politics, we don't have a real measure. So this is when we actually reduce it down to a certain level. Yes, Khalid, the ability to direct people and resources in a direction that you favor is a form of power, right? So that is a very interesting concept. And this is where we have this basic two words that we talk about, authority and responsibility. Because at the end of the day, why you're hired in a company is because you're supposed to take responsibility for an area of work to generate the income or to generate certain compliance things to be able to keep the company going. And then my next question is, what is authority? And this is when I would like to ask you guys, and for you guys to give me an answer if possible. What do you think authority is? People managing a team? Power, interesting, power. So who gives these people power? Ability to take control of a situation, very interesting. The designations give them the power. So this is very interesting, right? Why is it that the designation gives you a power? I like to ask this kind of questions. I'm sorry. This is the way we need to dig into this, right? Why is it that the CEO has the most amount of power? The organizations. Who makes up the organizations? Employees. That's actually exactly it. We give them power. We need to start by recognizing that authority is given by the people who believe and recognize that the authority exists. Yes, authority is the one that is allowed to take the decision that applies for all. We have given them the responsibility to make decisions for the rest of us. And what is really scary and what is office politics is when we give and people gain authority not by taking more responsibility. What do? They, like what's been mentioned, right? Having connections, right? Rather than work achievement. Not by showing your responsibility or actually doing the work, but by actually having the connections and sucking up to the right people, right? When we talk about this, there's the term called brown nosing, right? There's all this kind of different things, accountability or throwing of weight around, cause the title of hell. And that's actually very true. Employees themselves have created a norm that puts the management in power. Right? I mean, okay, other than COVID times, right now we're in COVID times, a lot of people are protecting their jobs because we have to, right? However, in a booming economy, typically you get to choose your boss if you allow yourself to. And this is also a large part of this, right? Polarization process comes from that. Right? So we give authority and power to somebody because we choose to partake in that exercise. What is wasta? Sorry. So we always need all of this. Reference? Okay, so sorry, I'm not very familiar with Hindi, but I just learned a new word, right? So wasta means reference. Okay, cool. Let me just read this about reference. So referrals, you mean like people referring into the companies, or this is a very useful conversation. I'm loving this. I'm learning something new from you guys. Yes, they get through reference. So this is why it's really interesting, right? It's a very interesting concept. So this is where I'm going to get to for the next part, right? Why is it that people do that? And let's put it very honestly. Why is it that people care and use reference? So when we talk about this, right, you have to understand how office politics works so that you can gain recognition without being in the crossfires. How many of you have been in the crossfires of office politics? Wasta is more like using influence to get the job done. That's very interesting, right? Okay, that's an interesting way of putting it, right? So that's a colloquial definition of that concept. Okay, cool. So we need to look at this, right? This is where we look at this in a very clear direction where it allows you to gain recognition without being in the crossfires if you understand the office politics. So when we talk about wasta or all these kind of different things, the truth is, if you understand how it works and why it works for those certain people, you know how to go against it. Know your enemy, know thyself, and then you can win all battles. right? We need to understand what they're using and why is it that they're succeeding. And furthermore, what people view as responsible. So this is the actual reason why influence matters. People think that somebody is responsible, which is why they give them the authority. A lot of people didn't actually recognize that their authority might not actually be responsible. We actually give it to them. And this is part of the process. So let's recognize this, right? Recognition, to be able to get to the next point and to get authority, you need to depend on others. Is it possible for you to just purely do the work, not show anybody, that's a key word, key term, and expect yourself to rise? You can't, because authority is given and power is given by people. And that's an inevitable, real situation. And then the other part about this is that once you understand how office politics works, so this is interesting. I have a backstory of working with 3 different conmen before, and I didn't know they were conmen, right? So I was working with these certain people. They knew how to get people's trust straight off the bat. And it's very interesting because they were not responsible for anything they were doing, but they could get into the trust of billionaires. So we met some amazing people, and I was like, wait, why are we meeting these people? So I thought these people were real and true, and these people could convince this kind of billionaires into working business with us, because these people should have better radars than I do. And then what happens is, I will discover about 1 or 2 months later, reading through the emails, going through all the stuff, that these guys have done none of the work they claim they have done, this conmen. And then even more importantly, they have thrown all the work to me. So I was taking all the responsibility, they were taking all the authority. They made all the decisions, I did all the work. And the relationship building was done by him. And he refused to let me meet these people. Or I was meeting them, but he was always playing one up with me. I mean, all 3 actually. So this was a regular thing that happened to me, right? I'm a person who likes taking responsibility because I like working, right? There's a reason why I took on this whole humongous burden called office politics, right? But it is a real situation where you would recognize, okay, why was I giving these people authority? Because they knew how to work. What I saw was responsible. This is where we're going to get to the next part, right? And only by recognizing how people recognize what responsibility is, what a responsible person looks like, can we work on recognition. And that's what we're trying to talk about. How do you get people to understand? By first, gaining their trust, getting them to see your own responsibility and how you've done it, so that they compare you to the other person who doesn't actually do the work, right? So once you get the recognition, you know that you can actually show the comparison for other people. You can actually get past the office politics. Here's why it's really important. So this is where we go to the next part, right? Getting recognized. So do you know what a responsible person looks like to other people? What do you think is what does a responsible person look like? A person in a suit? Who puts a stop when required? There's a person who draws boundaries. That's very good. Accountable, boss's favorites. Oh, respects boundaries. That's very, very useful, right? There are a lot of different things. What does a responsible person look like? The person who shouts the loudest? The person who makes the most noise? Or credits the team, helping hand? Realistic, Rhaenyra, very cool. You, ownership, yes. What are the symptoms and the signs that you look for that shows you that? So that's very interesting, right? You know why is it that the loudest mouth often gets higher? Yes, it looks like he has everything for the company, proprietary. They are in positions. They're usually trying to spend all their time getting other people to recognize their value. So when I worked at the convent, I recognized why they could get people to believe in him. You know what he did? He used me as the example as why he's responsible. He used me, an ex-medical student, a person who has what I do, and because I didn't make noise about myself beforehand, he could make use of my reputation and my abilities and my achievements to get the reputation with those people. Yes, a lot of people seem confident and capable, seem responsible. The more we recognize this, the more we recognize that a lot of times we don't get that kind of thing. We don't get the kind of recognition we deserve because we don't act like those people. And how can you do so, right? How can you feel this way? How can I put myself forward? How can I come to terms with this? And it comes to a bunch of stuff. So it doesn't matter how much work achievements you have. No, we don't have to pretend. This is why I need to go into this, right? Like you just need to know how to make it tangible. You just need to know where the boundaries lie, right? So I love the word boundaries. Boundaries is a wonderful thing. Responsible person. But you need to know what people view as responsible people. Okay, so another part about this is that there are bullying methods to look like you're responsible by, getting people. There are certain things that, in sociology we have studied a lot. Sociology has talked a lot about how we use association, right? I know this CEO of that company. I know that billionaire. I know this person. Like, to be honest, it was hilarious. I was hanging out with so many millionaires that I didn't know they were millionaires. I was friends with them, and I did not use any of my references, right? So why? Because I thought I had to be responsible for this. I cannot utilize my connections badly. I need to make sure that this relationship and this friendship stays. You know what the con men do? They move on to the next person if it fails, right? So you have to recognize that a lot of these processes goes back to the fact that these people are louder than you and always going to be loud. And what you can do is a very different approach. So let's start by looking at another part of this situation. Are you taking responsibility for yourself? Meaning, are you making sure that you can rise in the company, you are taking care of yourself, and you get the recognition you deserve if you don't speak up? Are you taking responsibility for yourself if you don't do that? You're thinking, okay, so if you need to speak up, right? You need to speak up in order for you to take responsibility for yourself. What is really interesting is that very often we expect the authority to know what we're good at. We expect the authority to know that we are doing the what is important. Like that we are carrying the company, right? This is when you need to gain confidence. You need to recognize what the value you bring, right? So I built the whole thing around this to try to get people to recognize how can you build your confidence. True confidence, not your, oh, look at me, I'm really awesome, right? But you don't really do anything, right? So it's all about slowly and surely building up your confidence and building you as a person, right? That's what we care about. Oh, I'm sorry, Sohal. Let me slow down a bit, right? So again, let me go back to this. When it comes to taking responsibility for yourself, you need to speak up for yourself. We cannot expect the authority to know what we are doing. We might carry the whole weight of the company, but they can't see it. It is very difficult for us to be able to gain the recognition. So this is yes, you know your skills the best, but at the same time, it is so hard to sell yourself. Is that true? Okay, well, I can say all the billion things in the world, right? And I can tell you all of this, but what's the main point if you don't even get there? Here comes the easy part, right? So the easier and more fun part of the equation. So when we talk about this, okay, you already know what you're responsible for. You know what you're responsible for and what you have done. You need to track it and make it clear. So what I've done with a friend of mine, actually a coachee of mine, what I've done was I sit him down and got him to write down every single task he did since he entered the company. Thankfully, we have the tracking apps. So thankfully, that whole list was really long. And he wrote even the stories around how he did them. He got 100% raise from that process. He didn't play games around other people's backs. He just went straight. He just said, look, I'm doing this for you. I've been covering this. But he also had to wait for the right opportunity to voice himself, not to sound arrogant or irritating, right? So what he did was, another part which I'm going to talk about, which is the next part, finding your mentors, sponsors, and advocates and actually being friends with them. So one of the interesting things about relationships in the workplace. So yes, we're talking about references. Yes, we're talking about it, but can it be done ethically? Can it be done in a manner that you're taking responsibility and showing that you're worth it, right? Would you ever, okay, so this is one of my favorite stories that people talk about, right? We are upset that Goldman Sachs paid out a ton of money to the bankers who brought us into the 2008 crisis. Will we be angry at a person who changed society and helped, like if we gave $1 million to somebody who constantly helps other people and constantly supports people? We wouldn't be outraged. We would actually love it. We would actually tell more people to do it, even though we might not do it ourselves, right? So we would be happy, right? If references are used well, is it a problem? Is it politics? Right? When you're showcasing your process, it is easier said than done, which is why it has to be a step-by-step process, right? It has to be a day-by-day. You build up your own bunch of things. Yes, it's a day-by-day step. Now, my favorite statement to everybody is, if you can take one step a day, how many steps is that a year? Like learning a language. If you learn one word a day, how many words would you learn a year? If you collate your information and you take time to build the relationships, just one at a time and once a day, what kind of impact would you be making in your own life? So I'm not talking about immediately getting recognition today, because that's impossible. You need to build relationships. You need to slowly work it through. And that's why it's so important. Relationships don't appear in a day, right? I don't see any relationships immediately appearing in a day, other than whirlwind romances that end within a few weeks, right? So relationships are built through time. We build trust, we build recognition, we build all these things through time. It takes baby steps. And I completely agree with you. It's easier said than done. It requires you to do one step a day. One imperfect, lousy step. One at least. Just try to do one. And one of my favorite exercises around this is this called No 0 Days. Just do one of the smallest unit. So here comes the question, right? Why is it that good, responsible people lose to office politicians? That's all good. Interesting. Your biggest supporter is a stranger. Your biggest... Yes. Because they don't like getting into politics, because they are too honest, because they sound out with their displeasure. They have... Yes. So, yes, they don't like irresponsible behavior. So let me ask you this question, right? If you were to look for a mentor or a sponsor, would you look for somebody you like first? So this is really interesting, right? Oh, wow, interesting. You wouldn't look for someone you like within the mentors and sponsors? You will look for, right? Okay, cool, no worries. Right? So it's very interesting, right? We need to go and find these people. Are you taking a step a day? It doesn't matter that you can't find your mentor within, it doesn't matter you can't find your mentor within a month. If you spend the time, would you be able to find a mentor eventually who matches you and is of your character, is able to like you, that you like too? If you take it a step at a time, again, imperfect, right? Like the number of failures I've had in my life is so many that I'm pretty sure, many of you would like, oh my God, you went through that? Yeah. A lot of my friends told me that every week that they meet me, oh, great, you have an optimism mentor. That's really cool. I've never heard of that. That's really cool, right? Okay, like how to be optimistic every day, right? How to keep your moods up and how to keep going. So it's very interesting. Can you be straightforward without being abrasive? Why is it that straightforward means abrasive? So here comes a very interesting point. This is the reason why I like audience interaction, right? I can explain to you, right? So somebody does something really terribly wrong and goes like, doesn't take responsibility. And I can give you an example that I'm dealing with right now. One of the coaches I have, one of the members in my membership program, is talking to me about a boss that doesn't take responsibility for the communication. So I could, if I was her, go up to the boss and go, why aren't you communicating? But the other option of this situation is, I recognize what you're trying to do. However, I feel like our communication is an issue. First, by reaching out and taking responsibility as part of the picture, you can be straightforward. Are you pretending? If you're angry, that's on you. If you communicate, you don't need to communicate the anger. It's very important that we have this in mind. So we go through this a little bit more, right? Gaining recognition is about it's by demonstrating your responsibility to the mentors, the sponsors, and the advocates so that they can recognize you. It is not an easy process. I'm giving you the answer here, right? Transparency with the mentor. Yes, there are a lot of different things that we can do to build the relationships and build the things that matter, right? This is how you can rise still by not playing office politics, by being yourself, by being authentic and actually empathetic and being open and clear. And that's exactly why it's so important. So as a summary, right? So you need to understand the office politics in the workplace. You need to demonstrate how you have been taking responsibility, because a lot of you, I'm pretty sure, have been doing so, but the company might not recognize it. Know how to recognize it. Number 3, find the mentors, sponsors, and advocates. These are going to be your best people that support you along the way. We are all alone if we do not find the people to walk the same path as us. And the last part is creating strong relationships. Right? Relationships, not in the negative sense, not in the I'm brown-nosing and trying to make you happy, but real, genuine relationships. And that's what we're focusing on. So my question to all of you guys is, what has been stopping you from achieving the gaining of recognition for yourself? And with that, we'll lead to the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Ethan. We will take up the Q&A. Do you want to show in your social media links as well?
Sure.
Yeah. Perfect.
Here we go.
Great, perfect. So Mike, Chani will also share one link. I will go ahead and share it as well in the chat box. Amazing. Thank you so much, Ethan. This has been an amazing session and so much value, right? There you go. Chani has shared the links as well.
Thank you.
Perfect. Great. Thank you so much. And this has been so important. I mean, I myself never knew that these are such basic rules which we can follow and definitely gain, the advantage of being recognized at work instead of getting into the office politics and getting into the deep down. So I have a couple of questions, but to start with, let me ask you one question about, so how did you discover that something like this is what you want to do? I mean, you want to educate people about office politics. How did you decide to go to this journey of educating people and sharing this knowledge with everyone? I know you've already shared a couple of instances, but if you could share one trigger that triggered and because of which you started this, if you could share that.
Sure. Actually, I will go back to when I was 14. So that's like 18 years ago. And I decided that I wanted never to be jaded. And so I didn't want to become yet another person in the workplace. I didn't want to become yet another jaded, angry, unhappy person. I think that decision made me very aware of who do I want to be, how do I want to get there, right? So office politics came as part of a series of accidents that I came to over the years. Like I said, right, I also work as a musician. I've also worked as a UX designer. I've worked as a culture designer. I've worked as the list goes on, right? So it's a very powerful thing that I've decided since I was 14, right? Like never to be jaded.
Oh, wow. Absolutely. So you've realized that early and you have been practicing it. And I'm so glad you're sharing this with everyone because I'm sure everyone has to know about this. These are the basics of office world and office tactics, I would say. And who isn't in the corporate world these days? Even if you're an entrepreneur and if you're still, trying to build your office, even though you should know about these things because, people usually think that if you have the power, you can do whatever you want to your employees and they are your slaves. And yeah, that's the attitude that everyone carries in their head. But I'm sure after today's session, a lot of them are also aware about what's happening. Basic. So I have another question for you. So I have seen your TEDx talk and I have also been following you on your social media handles. So I did read that you were into a little bit of depression and you've gone through clinical depression. And how did you cope up with that? And, due to the current scenario of COVID where people are suffering, most of them don't have jobs. Many of them, like me as well, even I lost my job due to the COVID scenario and I was sitting at home. It's been so many days, right? And people are dealing with really tough times and they are probably getting depressed, and that's the reason we started Empowerment Talks, to help people cope up with it and to not feel lonely and everything, right? So since you've gone through as well, if you could suggest or give an advice to our audience as well, so it'll be great.
Great. Okay, Tulika, very sorry to hear that you lost your job. See, one of the key part about this is one of the biggest realizations I've had during the time where I was depressed. So I was actually, the time when I was clinically depressed was when I was leaving medical school. So I was on a break from medical school. I was down. My mom was literally crying next door every single day as I was trying to recover, right? She'll be crying as if it's her issue, which I'm pretty sure a lot of you know this experience.
Yes, I can understand. That's truly moms. And even my mom, when I lost my job, she was like, no, why are you losing the job? Why you? So yeah, typical moms. Yes.
Yes. And that's it, right? Like, I think one of the biggest realizations, so one of the books that changed my life was this book called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. So this man, psychiatrist, he lived through the Holocaust. He was in one of the camp. Thankfully, he was like Auschwitz, where he would be killed. He managed to keep his whole bunk alive throughout the whole concentration camp. So he stopped people from committing suicide. He actually managed to give people hope and got them to survive through that really harsh reality. And I think it's really interesting, right? It's always about, yes, moms get so emotional. Sorry, I just saw this. One of the major things about this is that what keeps your life meaningful, right? I go back to this where I think because I decided not to be jaded, I think that first decision got me started on a journey that got me to recognize, like, when I was down, right? I felt trapped. I felt limited. Another major thing I learned along the way, like, this is afterwards when I discovered, right? Sadness. Let me type it into there. Man's Search for Meaning.
Do you want me to type? Okay. Yeah. Okay.
And I'm just typing it in. Great.
Thank you. Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the major realizations I've had also discovering this was that this emotion of sadness is not the problem. Sadness is a beautiful emotion. If you notice, we love movies with sad emotions. We love shows with sad emotions. Why
Absolutely.
is it? Yeah. Why is it that depression comes? Because we don't allow ourselves to be sad. And that's actually really important for me during that time. The moment I allowed myself to be sad, I could slowly crawl myself out. Because I discovered this is much later. Sadness is the emotion of reflection. It gets me to think about me. It gets me to really recalibrate and go, who do I want to be? And so I made use of that, right? You make use of that energy. Yeah.
Wow. So channelizing the right way of your sadness and your emotions. Wow. So I was so depressed, Ethan, and I was getting depressed. I was getting down the road. And that's when I discovered Empowerment Talks, and it actually changed everything around me. So I was very upset. Oh, I don't have a job. I'm going to survive in Dubai all alone with my mother around. It's going to be so difficult. And then I started looking at the positive sides of life. And I started realizing that why not utilize this time? Why not volunteer? Why not help everyone if possible? Right? And that's how it went about. Okay, there are people chatting with you on chat box.
No,
Great.
no, no. I said no, no. He raised his hand, so I just wondered. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, we'll take his question soon. If anyone else has a question, please go ahead and you can ask us. You can raise your hand, and we will unmute you. In the meanwhile, I will ask you one last question. I promise this is the last question.
Oh, no, no, Tulika, I just want to validate what you just said, right?
Yeah.
When you're depressed, if you're taking one step a day, it goes back to that, right? Are you taking one responsibility a day and choosing who you want to be? And that's exactly it, right? I love that. I think that you're a perfect example of how to get out of depression.
Perfect. And I realized a lot of things during this lockdown and the entire situation of going through the terrible time. I realized I can speak well. I wanted to become an RJ since I was a kid. And that's how this moment actually came out. And I was like, okay, yes, I can become an RJ. And I started pursuing it as much as possible and working towards the goal. So yes, so you should take it at the best spirit possible and look at the positive side of it. Thank you so much for the beautiful comments, everyone. Great. So one last question is about office politics, getting back to office politics. So, if you talk about office politics and office culture, right, society that you are in. So, how can you change the office politics and the culture in the society that you're a part of? So, getting back to that question. So, if you could tell me, and how can we use it as a normal employee? How can we use it as well in daily life? Yeah.
I think that's a beautiful question, right? Like, how can we change society, right? That's really what it is, right?
Yeah.
I think that's the question I've asked myself all along, right? So, like, never be jaded also means that you need to find your space. So I didn't talk about this during the talk because I mean, if I were to break down everything I've researched, I would talk for probably 2 days. It's all about building from what we term as childhood mentality. So a lot of us are still stuck in childhood mentality due to certain psychological traumas, all these different things. Change yourself to change the world, right? Change your mind first. So that's the first step, right? Find your space, find out who you are, who you want to be. No, who you are. Who you want to be is where you want to lead it to. It doesn't matter who you are today. Then start going into what can I do to represent that? And that's really how we change society, right? If you represent it, if you take the charge, you can change the world.
Wow, lovely. I love the way you answer the questions, and definitely, I'm sure this is helping our audience as well to understand that it's so important to just make sure that you're humble, you're honest, and you're focusing. You don't focus a lot on the office politics and adapt yourself to everything, right? Amazing. So I'm just going to unmute our audience now. I'm sorry for taking up so much of time. I'm quickly going to unmute Giri and someone else also had raised their hand. Okay, let me start with Giri. Giri Selvaraj, he is our regular attendee, and he's really a nice, humble person. He's helped me as well cope up, always motivating me and encouraging me. Go ahead, Giri, please ask your question. Giri, you're there?
Thank you, Ethan.
Yeah.
Thank you, Giri.
Thank you, Ethan. Thank you, Ethan. How to be, I love your topic, how to be recognized work without playing office politics. Almost it has taken 15 minutes to recognize your topic with your age. And you are talking about politics. I am seeing your age and your face